The story begins with two men from completely different worlds whose places were suddenly exchanged. Each of them awakened without warning, only to find himself inside a reality that did not belong to him, living a life he knew nothing about. One of them was an ordinary student from Japan named Hinohara Arata. Though most people simply called him Hinohara, he appeared quiet, naturally gentle, and always tried to get through each day without causing trouble. But his life was far from that of a normal student. After years of constant bullying from classmates and former friends, a heavy sense of loneliness and betrayal had settled deep within him. Every day he went to school with the feeling that everyone around him was waiting for him to make a single mistake so they could attack him. Over time, he learned to hide his emotions, pretending that nothing could affect him. At present, there was only one person he truly acknowledged as a friend, Suguro. Suguro was the only one who tried to approach him and treat him normally. He spoke with him, sat beside him in class, and asked about his day. For Hinohara, even those small moments were enough to make him feel that hope still existed. But his old friend from middle school, Kato, never left him alone. Kato constantly harassed him, usually accompanied by his new group of followers who obeyed him in everything. A serious confrontation had occurred between them back in middle school, and Kato had never forgotten it. The memory remained inside him as a deep grudge, and whenever he saw Hinohara, the anger from that past moment resurfaced. That confrontation had become a turning point in both of their lives. Since then, their relationship had been filled with tension and provocation. From time to time, Kato tried to prove that he was the stronger one, that he was still the one in control. Meanwhile, Hinohara did everything he could to avoid conflict. But no matter how hard he tried to keep his distance, Kato always returned, as if he simply could not allow him to live in peace. One day, Kato's group approached Suguro after discovering that he was Hinohara's friend. They surrounded him, pressuring him with questions in front of everyone about his relationship with Hinohara. Suguro was clearly frightened. His expression changed as he stood alone before them. Under that pressure, he was forced to say that they were not friends, that he had never even considered Hinohara his friend in the first place. Those words were cruel. They were spoken in front of many students, and the rumor quickly spread throughout the entire school. When Hinohara heard what had happened, he felt as if the final thread he had been holding on to had snapped. The loneliness inside him grew deeper than ever. Meanwhile, in another world, a place known as Amawakuni, there was someone who looked exactly like Hinohara. His name was also Arata. Their appearances were almost identical, and they were the same age, yet their lives were completely different. That world was governed by ancient rituals and a strict tribal order. Everything followed laws that had existed for generations. And within that system, Arata lived among his clan while carrying responsibilities far greater than someone his age should bear. Although he was a boy, his grandmother Makari constantly forced him to disguise himself as a girl. In front of others, she treated him as if he truly were one. She always claimed that it was for his own good, and for the good of the clan. But when Arata refused and declared that he no longer wished to continue living in disguise, Makari attacked him to force him to obey. Their confrontation was harsh. Her words made it clear that he had no other choice. The reason she forced him to live as a girl was because their clan, the Haikyuu clan, was required to send someone to attend an extremely important ritual. This ceremony occurred only once every 30 years. During that ritual, a new ruler of Amawakuni would be chosen. The person would receive the title of Himeo. The ceremony gathered every clan together, and all eyes were fixed upon it. Any mistake during the ritual could trigger a political disaster between the clans. According to the ancient law, the one who assumed that position had to be a girl. The rule could not be broken. However, there was no other girl within the Hime clan. Because of that, Makari had no choice but to send Arata. It was an enormous risk. Arata knew that if his secret were exposed, if anyone discovered that he was actually a boy, he would be executed immediately without discussion. Even so, as Makari had explained, the entire clan would be punished if they failed to send someone, and they might lose their standing among the other clans forever. Makari never concerned herself with what might happen to her. To her, that was insignificant. The only thing that mattered was that Arata remained alive so he could protect the Hagami of their clan, an inheritance passed down from their ancestors for generations. The Hagami was not merely a weapon, it was the very symbol of the clan's power, the reason other clans respected them. Losing it would mean the complete end of their name. In the end, Arata was forced to accept his grandmother's decision, despite the fear and pressure weighing heavily on him. With the help of his childhood friend from the Hime clan, Kotoha, preparations for the ritual began. Kotoha stayed by his side trying to reassure him. She told him everything would pass safely. Together they carefully dressed him in the clothing of a girl, arranging every detail of his appearance so that no one would suspect the truth. Every detail had to be perfect, from the clothes to the hairstyle, even the way he walked and spoke. Before his departure, Kotoha noticed how anxious Arata looked. She approached him and handed him the protective charm she had been wearing. She explained that she had received it from the current Himeo Kiri during the time she served in the capital. Soon after, they arrived at the capital. Arata headed directly toward the ceremonial grounds, gazing at the vast hall where the ritual would take place before all the clans. The 12 Shino were already standing in their positions, each one watching the surroundings with sharp vigilance. After a short while, Kiker arrived. The ritual was meant to begin officially the moment she appeared, but the instant Kiker began the ceremony, one of the Shino suddenly moved. His name was Koji. It was as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. Without warning, Koji rushed forward and launched a sudden attack, striking Kiker and knocking her violently to the ground. Yet Kiker quickly rose again. Regaining her balance, she activated her Amatsu Reki, surrounding herself with spiritual power to defend against the assault. At that moment, Koji realized the truth. After hearing Arata's voice while he spoke, he discovered that Arata was actually a boy. When Arata called out to the other Shino, asking them to help him, none of them moved. Not a single one stepped forward. It was as if they were either hesitating or had no intention of interfering. Suddenly, Koji attacked Arata and declared that the 12 Shino were launching a rebellion against the current system. Chaos erupted across the ceremonial grounds. Taking advantage of the confusion, Arata managed to escape, but after he fled, something strange happened. The flames surrounding the ceremonial area suddenly vanished. People outside the grounds were shocked. Murmurs spread quickly as everyone began wondering what had just happened. A moment later, Koji appeared before the crowd and announced that what had happened to Kiker was the fault of Arata. It was clear he was trying to place all the blame on him. Because of Koji's words, soldiers were immediately dispatched to search for Arata everywhere. Realizing he had nowhere else to go, Arata decided to head toward a place known as Kando Forest, hoping he could hide there for a while. When Koji learned that Arata had entered the forest, he simply laughed. According to him, that forest would become Arata's grave. Once inside Kando Forest, escaping would not be easy. Meanwhile, when Kotoha heard what had happened, she hurried toward the forest, hoping she could reach Arata before the soldiers did. At the same time, in another world, Hinohara was walking home, speaking quietly to himself. Inside his mind, he carried a single wish. He wished he could disappear from this world, live somewhere where he would no longer be a burden to anyone. Lost in those thoughts, he felt completely directionless, unable to understand his place in the world. Then suddenly, in a brief moment that defied explanation, Hinohara and Arata found themselves standing before each other. Something strange had occurred between them. In that exact instant, their places were exchanged, without warning or reason. Hinohara was shocked when he suddenly found himself standing inside a forest, just moments after he had been walking through the city. The moment he stepped out from between the trees, Koji immediately attacked him, believing he was the Arata the soldiers were chasing. Terrified and completely confused, Hinohara ran for his life. He soon hid himself again among the trees of Kando Forest, unable to understand anything that was happening around him. Meanwhile, the Hagami kept in their village suddenly reacted. It began to tremble and suffer violently, as if it were sensing the condition that had befallen Arata. At the same time, the soldiers quickly managed to locate Hinohara's position. One of them signaled the others to move immediately. When the rest arrived, another member of the Shino, named Aki, approached Koji. He told him that he should have used his own Hagami from the beginning to finish the matter quickly instead of letting it drag on. But Koji was confident that he could capture Arata himself. Meanwhile, after returning to the village, Kotoha told Makari everything that had happened in detail. As for Hinohara, he kept trying to explain to them that he was not the Arata they knew. He insisted that he was someone completely different. However, no one believed him. It was only when Kotoha suggested that the reason might be Kando Forest, and that what had happened was far from coincidence, that they began to take the possibility seriously. At that moment, Makari sat down with Hinohara and began speaking to him more calmly. Hinohara explained that he had come from a country called Japan. After hearing that, Makari shared what she knew about Kando Forest. According to their beliefs, anyone who entered that forest became mysteriously connected to someone from another world. It was as if the forest linked the fate of two people together across different worlds. Suddenly, Hinohara remembered the moment he had seen Arata just before heading toward Kando Forest. The memory became clear in his mind. At that moment, he began to feel that what was happening was not a coincidence at all. Something far greater than he understood had been unfolding from the very beginning. Then suddenly, Makari heard Kotoha scream. The reason was clear. Koji and his group had arrived. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed outside, and the tension in the air grew instantly. The moment Makari stepped outside, she lied and told them that Arata was not there. But Koji did not believe her. It was obvious he had come knowing exactly what he wanted. Hearing Kotoha's frightened voice, Hinohara could no longer remain hidden. Unable to endure her fear, he stepped out and revealed himself. Koji immediately ordered his men to eliminate him. However, Hinohara managed to dodge the attack at the last moment and began running through the area in panic. Then he saw it, the Hagami. Without hesitation, he grabbed it. For the first time in his life, he felt as if he might actually be able to defend himself. The intense anger and fear burning inside him triggered something within the weapon. The Hagami suddenly reacted. Its power began to awaken. At that moment, Koji drew his own Hagami, called Home, and began attacking with even greater force, clearly intending to end the battle quickly. Seeing this, Makari hurriedly told Hinohara what he needed to do in order to awaken the Hagami and make it respond fully to him. Gathering all his focus, Hinohara concentrated his energy. For the first time, he succeeded in blocking Koji's attack. In that moment, he realized something. He was not as weak as he had always believed. Koji was shocked when he realized that Hinohara had become one of the chosen. Those who were chosen by a Hagami were known as Sho. Among the Shino, this was considered both a great honor and a heavy responsibility. As the battle continued, the house around them began collapsing under the pressure of their power. Realizing the building might fall on them, Koji and his men quickly withdrew outside. Meanwhile, in the other world, Linao and his mother were confused because they could no longer reach Hinohara. It was as if the connection between the two worlds had suddenly been severed. Moments later, they heard nearby movement and strange noise. When they went to investigate, they discovered Arata. However, because of the strong resemblance between them, they believed he was Hinohara. Confused, they began asking what had suddenly happened. Back at the village, the soldiers searched everywhere for Hinohara, but they could not find him. It was as if he had vanished completely. As for Koji, he could not understand how Hinohara's Hagami had managed to block his strike. The development left him both frustrated and shocked. Eventually, Makari and Hinohara managed to escape with great difficulty. They hid inside a cave far away from the soldiers. There, Makari began explaining more about the Hagami. She told him that they were the gods of Amawakuni, appearing in the form of swords. Each Hagami possessed its own spirit and unique power. The person chosen by a Hagami was called a Sho. That meant the individual had formed a direct bond with the weapon's power. Now, Hinohara had become one of them. It was a dangerous fate, but at the same time, it granted him immense power. Meanwhile, Aki appeared before Koji and told him that Arata had to be captured alive, so he could be judged before the people. Killing him would serve no purpose. The truth had to be revealed in front of Iljamir. Those words calmed Koji somewhat, but he remained determined to capture him. Hinohara sat there, thinking about everything that had suddenly happened in his life. Memories rushed through his mind one after another until Kotoha approached him. To her, he was still the Arata she had known for so long. No matter how much he tried to explain, she continued to see him as the same person she had always known and trusted. Once again, he tried to make her understand that he was not Arata, but someone else whose life had suddenly been overturned. But she did not believe him. Then, without warning, she embraced him. A moment later, she realized that he was not wearing a protective charm as he should have been. Since she still was not convinced that he was truly someone else, she assumed the charm had probably been lost in the chaos. So, in order to protect him, she gave him the other half of the protective charm and told him to keep it with him, because it would help keep him safe. Soon after, Koji and his group arrived. They were holding Makari hostage in order to pressure the others. Since Hinohara did not have the Hagami with him at that moment and had no way to confront them directly, he had no choice but to surrender. Later, while he was inside a room within the transport carriage, the protective charm in his possession began to emit a strange yet gentle light, as if it were responding to something. Then suddenly, he saw Arata before him. Hinohara was shocked to discover that Arata was also inside his room. He tried to move closer, but he collided with something invisible, as though a barrier separated them and prevented either of them from approaching the other. There, in the middle of that silence, the two of them began to speak. At last, they became certain that their places had truly been exchanged in a way neither of them could understand. Hinohara asked Arata why he had attacked the Himeo. His voice carried more doubt and fear than accusation. But Arata denied it immediately. He said he had attacked no one, that Koji was the real culprit, and that the rest of the 12 Shino were either conspiring with him, or, at the very least, remaining silent about what was happening. At first, Hinohara hesitated to trust Arata, especially after everything he had gone through before, and his constant fear of trusting someone only to be betrayed again. To him, trust had become something painfully difficult. At that, Arata told him that he did not need to trust him. His grandmother had always said that anyone who directly repeated the words, "trust me," only made trust weaken even more, as if trying to force it instead of earning it. After that, Arata said that he would start calling him Hinohara, and that Hinohara should also call him Arata. Since their names were so similar, this would make it easier for them to deal with each other as two different people, even if they were now bound by the same fate. Then Arata asked about his grandmother Makari, and about Kotoha. When he learned that they were safe, he apologized to Hinohara for the fact that he was now enduring that suffering in his place, as though he believed everything that had happened was his own fault. In response, Hinohara told him that he too had become one of the show. That made Arata genuinely happy. He said that this meant they would be able to face the Shino together, and that this new power might help them escape the crisis they had fallen into. But their conversation suddenly stopped. From outside, Hinohara's mother called out loudly to Arata, who was inside Hinohara's body. The two of them immediately fell silent, as if the connection between them had been cut off in that very moment. After many long hours of travel, they arrived at the capital. The atmosphere there was clearly tense, and the place was filled with soldiers. The trial was presided over by one of the Shino, named Yuti. The rest of the Shino were also present, seated in their places as though they were carefully judging the situation. At the same time, the soldiers kept a strict watch over Makari, clearly unwilling to allow her even the slightest unexpected movement. Makari understood that what was coming next would be even harsher. Because of that, before entering the trial, she gave Kotoha an important request. The moment the trial began, Hinohara calmly tried to present the information he had learned from Arata. He defended himself and told the truth as he understood it, but Aki pointed his Hagami at him, as if trying to pressure him psychologically. At the same time, the rest of the Shino spoke against him, insisting that his words were nothing more than an attempt to escape the accusation. Because of that, no one believed the charges he made against them. In the end, after a long debate, the verdict was delivered. He was declared guilty. However, instead of sentencing him to death, Koji decided to send him to Gaia Island. That island was a place where criminals were exiled to live under extremely harsh conditions, something close to hell itself, with almost no protection and no real safety. But the true reason behind Koji's choice was different. He wanted to learn more about Hinohara's Hagami, and see how far its power would develop if he were left alone in such a brutal environment. Later, while they were on the way to Gaia Island, Hinohara was shocked when one of the soldiers brought Kotoha in after she had been captured trying to board an airship. Kotoha was visibly tense, and the soldiers assumed that Makari had ordered her to bring the Hagami to him by any means necessary. Hinohara immediately tried to use the Hagami, but it did not respond. It was as though it had refused to answer his call at that moment. Then suddenly, the protective charm lit up once again. A woman's voice began speaking from within that light, and the two of them felt as though they had entered a dimension separate from the world they had been in. Then, without warning, Kikar appeared before them. Kikar said that she had an important request for Hinohara. She already knew everything that had happened during the trial, as though she had been watching it all from afar. She also admitted that she had been impressed by the words he had spoken there, because to her, they had sounded sincere and courageous. But before making her request, she began to explain the duties of the Himeo. She told him that the Himeo's primary role was to control the power of the Hagami in order to preserve the balance between the different forces of the two worlds. Any disruption in that balance could bring enormous chaos upon both people and worlds. Then Kikar continued. She said that the true duty of the Himeo was to maintain peace between the people and between the two worlds, because she was the one who governed the power of the Hagami and kept its energy in balance. But in her current state, there was a great possibility that this power would spiral out of control, and instead of remaining a force of protection, it could become something that dominated the entire world. If that happened, people would suffer even more, and the world would descend into a great chaos between humanity and spiritual power. For that reason, she asked Hinohara to lead Amawokuni in her place. It was as if she were placing upon him a responsibility far greater than his age or experience. She also asked him to bring his Hagami to the place where she was before she died completely, as though she wanted reassurance that this power would remain in safe hands before she disappeared forever. Hinohara was not confident in his ability to fulfill her request. To him, the task felt far beyond what he could handle, but Kiker had complete faith in him. She told him that she saw something different in him, and that he would be able to do it even if he himself still could not believe in his own strength. After she finished speaking, she suddenly vanished. Then the two of them found themselves back inside the airship once again, as though everything that had happened had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. After hours of travel, they finally arrived at Gaia Island. The moment they entered, they saw the other prisoners. Their faces clearly showed how cruel life in that place was. Exhaustion and fear were visible on every one of them. News of what had happened to the Himeo had already reached the island quickly, and whispers about the new accused prisoner began spreading among the inmates. Then suddenly, two prisoners named Kite and Jinchi appeared to take their belongings and search them, as though that was simply a routine procedure in that place. Suddenly, Kite attacked Hinohara without warning. He was convinced that Hinohara had great value, since he was the one accused of attacking the Himeo, the very person everyone was talking about. But the moment Hinohara fell to the ground, the earth beneath them began to shake violently. The older prisoners already knew what was about to happen, so they immediately rushed to hide in safe places. Then, without warning, strange creatures resembling enormous tubes burst out from the ground. They seized two prisoners and dragged them down inside at once. After that, silence fell. It was as if nothing had happened at all. One of the female prisoners approached Hinohara and told him that what had just happened was something that occurred almost every day on the island. It was part of the system of this place. She explained that the warden, known as Susoga, chose two prisoners from time to time to be absorbed by those creatures. Because of that, everyone on the island lived in constant fear, waiting for the moment their own turn might come. At the same time, while the rest of the Shino were returning to their own lands, Koji was still investigating Hinohara's Hagami, focusing on every detail connected to that power. Aki went to him because he wanted to know the real reason why Koji had sent Hinohara to Gaia Island instead of ending the matter once and for all. But Koji replied that there was still something he wanted to understand more deeply. He said he would not reveal his full plan until he had gathered enough information, and that once he reached clearer details, he would inform him immediately. The next day, the judgment of the island returned once again in a strange way. Because of the tremors, the ground beneath Kotoha suddenly collapsed. Hinohara immediately rushed down to search for her in the middle of the chaos, overcome with fear for her safety. There, he encountered a group of criminals who saw the current situation as an opportunity. Those criminals believed they might receive a reward if they got rid of Hinohara, so they chased after him through that narrow place. While hiding from them, the woman who had spoken to him the day before approached him again, as though she were quietly helping him escape without drawing attention. There, the two of them calmly introduced themselves to each other, and she told him that her name was Osumi. When she learned that he was searching for Kotoha, she told him that Kaon Ate and Jinchi were the ones who had saved her. Osumi understood very well what it felt like to be separated from someone dear to you, or to lose that person suddenly. Because of that, she did not hesitate to help Hinohara, and she tried to calm him, even slightly, in the middle of all the chaos surrounding him. At the same time, Kotoha was speaking with Kaon Ate, trying to understand the current situation. Then the two of them explained to each other what had happened on the island. After a while, Kaon Ate decided to go out herself and search for Jinchi, because she was worried about him. When she found him, he was lying on the ground, injured, while Hinohara stood nearby. At that moment, Kaon Ate immediately assumed that Hinohara was the one who had attacked him. Fear for Jinchi and anger rose inside her at once, and she began attacking Hinohara over and over again without listening to any explanation. In the end, Hinohara was forced to draw his Hagami in order to block her attacks and defend himself. He did not do it to hurt her. He only wanted to stop the assault. Then suddenly, Jinchi regained consciousness. He shouted at Kaon Ate, telling her that she had misunderstood everything and that Hinohara had not been attacking them at all. Instead, he had been trying to help him and save him. At that very moment, one of the members of the Bluebird group appeared, seeking revenge against Jinchi and preparing to attack them again. But Hinohara moved faster. He rushed at him and stopped him before he could harm anyone else. Only then did Kaon Ate fully understand what had happened. She realized that Hinohara was the one who had actually saved Jinchi from the members of Bluebird, and that she had been too quick to judge him. Because they had stolen Jinchi's ring, Kion Ate decided to attack the entire Bluebird territory in order to recover it and take revenge on them at the same time. She was acting out of both anger and fear for Jinchi. After that, Hinohara brought Jinchi to Kotoha so she could treat his injury. There, Jinchi began calmly explaining how he and Kion Ate had come to know each other and why that ring meant so much to him. He said that the ring had been a gift from his mother before he was kidnapped by a band of thieves. That same gang was the one Kion Ate had once belonged to in the past, before she left them and tried to live a different life. That was why the matter meant so much to both of them. It was tied to painful memories, and at the same time, to a hope that had never completely faded. A little later, Kion Ate returned with Jinchi's ring and explained that she had managed to recover it after a short battle. Immediately afterward, she decided to challenge Hinohara to a fight. In her eyes, defeating the one accused of attacking the Himeo would prove her strength and perhaps give them a new chance at life. Kion Ate truly intended to begin the duel, but before the battle could start, the island's judgment descended once again, suddenly and without warning. This time, the choice was different. She had never imagined that she herself would be the one selected, and when those strange forces nearly dragged Hinohara along as well, Jinchi suddenly pushed him away. He chose to go with Kion Ate instead of letting her face that fate alone, as though he had decided to share the same destiny with her. Hinohara froze in place from the shock of what had happened. The sight before him left him unable to move, but then he forced himself to gather his courage. He believed that the two of them were still alive, and that saving them was still possible, so he and the others entered a massive tube-like passage that had emerged from the ground, hoping it would lead them to Kion Ate and Jinchi before any harm came to them. When Kion Ate and Jinchi regained consciousness, they found themselves bound and imprisoned in a strange place. Then Susoga spoke. He declared that they would be judged for their crime within the island, but that he would grant them a chance to save themselves from death. That chance was simple and cruel. They would fight each other in battle. Whoever emerged victorious would be declared innocent and allowed to leave Gaia Island. It was as though he were testing both their strength and their will to survive. But if they refused to fight, then both of them would die without any other chance. Kion Ate immediately agreed to the battle, seeing it as her only path to survival. Their restraints were removed, and the two of them prepared for the confrontation. As for Jinchi, he rushed toward her. But in truth, he had never wanted to fight her at all. At that very moment, Hinohara and the others arrived at that place and were stunned by what they saw unfolding before them. Susoga calmly told them that survival here meant defeating one's opponent and deciding the battle in one's favor, as though the island itself obeyed nothing but the law of the strong. At once, Hinohara rushed forward, trying to stop Susoga and prevent the fight, but Susoga moved quickly and attacked him to stop him from interfering. At the same time, just as Kion Ate was on the verge of ending the battle against Jinchi, Jinchi was forced to strike her in order to protect himself. But the blow was harsh and heavy, as though it had decided both of their fates at once. Hinohara quickly realized the truth. Kion Ate had done it on purpose. She had been trying to push Jinchi into striking her, so that he would survive and leave Gaia Island, even if it cost her own life. But suddenly, Susoga seized Jinchi and declared that he too would be punished for the crime he had committed against Kion Ate. It was as though the law of the island made no distinction between self-defense and attack. At that moment, Hinohara's anger burst into flames. He felt that injustice was unfolding right before his eyes, so he gripped his Hagami, unleashed its power, and moved to free Jinchi by force. While confronting Susoga directly, the two of them exchanged blows violently. Even though Hinohara was on the verge of collapsing to the ground more than once, he rose every time with even greater resolve. One by one, the other prisoners emerged from their hiding places. They were shocked to see Hinohara fighting Susoga himself, because they could feel that this battle might change the entire system of the island. Meanwhile, on the other side, Koji was on his way to meet Hinohara again. He could already sense that the power which had appeared was about to overturn the balance of power in Amawokuni. Before long, Hinohara succeeded for the first time in gaining complete control over the power of the Hagami. It was as if the sword was no longer merely a weapon in his hand, but had become part of his very will. From a distance, Koji witnessed that power and was stunned by how far Hinohara had developed in such a short time. In that moment, he realized that Hinohara had become far more dangerous than he had ever expected. When Susoga attempted to strike him with one final attack, Hinohara dissolved it with ease through the power of the Hagami, as though his new strength had already surpassed everything that had come before it. Then, at that moment, something strange appeared before him. It became clear that Susoga was not merely an ordinary warrior. His own Hagami had been driven into his abdomen, and he was drowning in an inner darkness, as though that very power had been devouring him from within. When Hinohara touched Susoga, he saw part of his past. He learned how Susoga had ended up in that state, and why the sword had been embedded in him in the first place. He saw old disappointments and a painful betrayal, the very things that had turned him into the person he had become. Even so, Hinohara chose not to kill Susoga. Instead, he decided to pull the Hagami out of his body and free him from the darkness controlling him, even though doing so was extremely difficult. At that point, Susoga realized that what had happened to him was very similar to what Hinohara had experienced before. Both of them had been betrayed by people they had believed were their friends, and both had lost faith in others. But Hinohara made it clear that, despite everything that had happened, he still considered Suguro his friend, and that he would not allow betrayal to change him or turn him into a cruel person. Removing the Hagami was not easy at all. It required immense strength and unwavering resolve. But because Hinohara was determined to save him, he finally managed to pull the Hagami free. Susoga stood there in shock at what had happened. A few moments later, the Hagami returned to its original form, and it was revealed that its name was Seni, and that it was bound to an ancient spirit and great wisdom. After that, Susoga chose to place his trust in Hinohara, and submitted to him as an acknowledgement of both his strength and his sincere intentions. The moment he stood on his feet once more, he used the power of Seni to restore Gaia Island to its original state, as though all the chaos that had taken place there was beginning to disappear little by little. And indeed, the people who had previously been swallowed returned to normal life again. Among them was Osumi's companion, Masahi. That alone returned a measure of hope to the hearts of the people. Afterward, Susoga told Hinohara that an even greater danger was approaching, and that they had to move quickly before this new power turned into an even greater catastrophe. When Koji arrived, Susoga appeared before him and declared that the situation had changed, that he now served Hinohara. That alone made Koji realize that the balance of power had truly begun to shift. Susoga added that the Hagami carried by Hinohara was not merely an ordinary sword, but the blade that could determine the fate of the entire world if that power were used wrongly or without balance. In the end, Hinohara decided to head for the capital in order to face the even greater trials waiting for him there. As for Koji, he returned to his land in Kagutsuchi, the place where the most important person in his life had been buried, and where his old memories still lay at rest. After several minutes of running, while they were speaking with Honi, the egg she had been carrying suddenly hatched right in front of them. It was a strange and surprising sight for all of them. At the same time, the village chief arrived. His name was Oika, and Kite was with him. The moment Hinohara approached them, he suddenly collapsed from exhaustion and illness. When he woke a little later, Kao and Ate told him that they were now in Oika village, and that they had decided to stay there for a while in order to rest. After that, Fuyu, Oika's wife, entered to return his clothes and help him settle down. There, he also learned that he had been suffering from a fever caused by exhaustion, and that he should thank Kotoha, since she was the one who had treated him and taken care of him along the way. Kao and Ate also told him that Oika was one of Koji's Zokusho, and that the Zokusho were Sho who served the Shino and supported them. Suddenly, Oika entered carrying his Hagami, and it was clear that he had come in already knowing everything happening around him. He already knew that Hinohara was one of the Sho because Honi had informed him through the power of her Hagami, as though the information had reached him without anyone speaking a single word. Elsewhere, Koji stood before Imu's grave. He looked calm on the outside, but tension was burning inside him. When one of his soldiers called out to him, he reported that something serious had happened at the home of one of his Zokusho, a man named Kijiso. When Koji arrived at the place, he was shocked by the scene before him. Kijiso himself had disappeared in a mysterious way, as though the earth had swallowed him whole. One of Kijiso's followers said that what had happened was the work of an unknown person, but there was no clear evidence to explain exactly what had taken place. On the other side, Oika gathered Hinohara and Kao and Ate together and began speaking to them calmly about the battle for the position of the great king and about the future awaiting Amawokuni. Oika said that even if that conflict might lead to war, there could still be a path to choosing a king without battle. That would only be possible if all the Sho decided to submit to one person and acknowledge that person's authority. Those words made Hinohara remember what Susoga had done before, and how power could sometimes prevent destruction instead of causing it. After that, they were surprised to learn that Oika already knew what had happened on Gaia. He also knew that Susoga had submitted to one of the Sho who had been accused of attacking the Himyo, but Oika believed that this Sho was innocent because he believed that Seni could see the truth within a person's heart and intentions, not merely their outward actions. And when he heard the name of the Sho in question, he realized that they were talking about Hinohara himself. That realization made the weight of responsibility on his shoulders feel heavier than ever. A little later, word reached them that a guest had arrived to meet him. On the way there, Hinohara saw Kotoha and Honi after they had changed their clothes. It was clear that they had tried, if only for a little while, to step away from the atmosphere of fear and tension. Oika was pleased by their appearance and by the fact that they were safe, as though he saw in them a faint hope for the future of the village. But the surprise was that the guest was none other than Aki. At once, the atmosphere grew tense. Aki declared that Koji was the one who had attacked the Himeo. Then he offered Oika the chance to become his Zokusho in exchange for protection and influence. However, Oika did not believe those words so easily. He said that even if it were true, he would remain loyal to Koji until he could confirm the truth with his own eyes. At that point, Aki was forced to use his Hagami, called Akor, and launched a direct attack toward Fuyu, Oika's wife, as a way of pressuring him. Out of fear for her and for the people of his village, Oika agreed to submit to Aki's demand. Even so, he asked him not to harm his wife or the villagers, and Aki appeared to promise him exactly that. But the moment the submission was completed, their servant suddenly entered, and Aki killed him at once, without the slightest hesitation, as though that had been part of his plan from the very beginning. Right after that, he killed Fuyu as well, as if his true goal had been to shatter Oika's will completely. As for Honi, she lost consciousness from the sheer shock of witnessing everything that happened before her eyes. What had taken place was merciless and horrifying beyond words. Then Aki sensed that someone was hiding nearby. So he lifted the barrier that had been blocking sight and movement, revealing the entire area. At that exact moment, Koji arrived, but it was already too late to save the situation. Driven by rage, Koji rushed at Aki immediately. Without a moment of hesitation, the two of them clashed in a fierce battle, exchanging powerful and rapid blows, each trying to prove that he was the stronger one. The fight continued until the force of their collision sent both of them crashing downward. At that moment, Hinohara drew his Hagami. Then, in the middle of the battle, Aki spoke Imu's name. The instant he did, Koji suddenly faltered, as though that name had pressed against an old wound buried deep inside him, and Homa fell from his hand. At that point, Aki revealed that he had gathered the Hagami of all the Zokusho who served under Koji, as though they had become part of a single power known as Ururu. That power was far greater than any individual strength, and when he took Homa as well, Koji still tried to continue fighting without a weapon, as though he had decided to rely on nothing but his own strength. But Aki struck him with violent and merciless blows using a core. His attacks were direct, brutal, and relentless. Hinohara could no longer bear that sight. He shouted at Aki and confronted him, rejecting the path he had chosen to reach the position of the great king. He said that power should not become a means of controlling people. But Aki answered that the fate of any show could only lead to one of two outcomes: either submit to others and live as a subordinate, or dominate them by force in order to survive. To him, the world itself was built upon that struggle. After that, Aki left the place, leaving Koji to suffer under the weight of his defeat, as though that loss had been far greater than a mere battle. Honi tried to ask Koji to bring Oika back, but he explained that it was impossible to restore a Sho who had already submitted. He had also lost his own Hagami, which meant that both his position and his power had been shattered. When he tried to leave, Hinohara stopped him, because he could not accept letting him walk away in that state, drowning in his own collapse. But Koji did not listen. He left everyone behind, as though he had decided to bear the consequences of his choices alone. That night, Hinohara sat thinking about the request Kiri had made of him. He hesitated. He wanted to stop Aki and prevent war, but at the same time, he could not do things the way Aki did. He did not want to force the other Sho into submission, nor did he want to rule them through power alone. At that point, Kotoha reminded him that he was not required to force anyone to submit to him. People might choose to follow him of their own will if they came to trust him. Just as Susoga had chosen to trust Hinohara, she also remembered something Mari had told her when she was young, that there existed a legendary Hagami with no offensive power, yet it was the one that ruled the world through the strength of its will and its influence over hearts, not through swords. And she had a feeling that Hinohara's Hagami was that very legendary Hagami. Its name was Tsukuyo. It was as though that sword was not merely merely a weapon for battle, but a symbol of balance. A quiet power that went beyond the meaning of war itself. And when Hinohara tried to call out to it, a bright and powerful light burst forth from the blade, as though the sword had responded to him clearly for the very first time. That light was seen by Koji from afar as well, and in that moment, he felt that the course of events would soon begin to change. The following day, Hinohara spoke with Honi, and told her that there was a chance they might be able to bring Oika back if they could find the right way. He explained that he did not yet know how it could be done, but he was certain that the Himeo was capable of doing something that would preserve the balance. After that, they decided to continue their journey toward the capital, even though the road ahead was still long and dangerous. Meanwhile, in the other world, Arata noticed Suguro standing in front of their house. He paused for a moment to make sure of the situation before moving. Then he quickly passed by without speaking to him, as though he were running from his feelings, or from the past itself. After that, Arata caught up with Suguro before he could leave. Instead of prolonging the conversation, he handed him the item he had borrowed from Hinohara, then quietly walked away, as if saying farewell to a part of the past without using words. The next day, he decided to go to school as usual. Because he had always seen Katawaki together with Hinohara, he assumed they had once been close friends, so he greeted him warmly, as though they had known each other well for a long time. But then his mother called for him so they could go speak with his teacher and explain that his memory still had not fully returned and that he needed more time to recover and remember everything from his life. On his way to class, Katawaki's friends stopped him and took him up to the school rooftop where Katawaki was already waiting. Strangely, the first thing that caught Arata's attention was the view of the city from above. It was as though the calmness of the place interested him more than the confrontation itself. That only irritated Katawaki even more, because he felt that Arata did not care about him or about what had happened between them. From their behavior and the way they spoke, Arata immediately understood that they were not Hinohara's friends, and that the relationship between them was filled with tension and old hostility. When he tried to leave without dragging out the exchange, Katawaki suddenly struck at him, but Arata blocked the blow with ease. Then he answered with a fast and powerful kick that knocked Katawaki unconscious at once, sending him to the ground before he could resist. Elsewhere, while crossing the river, Kotoha suddenly stumbled from sheer exhaustion. Since she was no longer able to continue walking, they had no choice but to return to a safe place so they could treat her and let her rest. There, they discovered that the show could not directly heal themselves or recover their own wounds. They needed help from someone else. Because of that, Kao and Ate decided to go out and gather medicinal herbs from the surrounding area in order to help treat her. A little later, Hinohara stepped outside and spoke once again with Arata through the spiritual connection linking the two of them. He told him everything that had happened recently. He focused in particular on the fact that Aki had taken Koji's Hagami by force, and that the situation had become far more dangerous than before, because that power was now in the hands of someone who used it to control others. In return, Arata told Hinohara what had happened to him at school, and that he had gotten into a fight and struck a student who had been provoking him. When Hinohara realized that the student was Katawaki, he was stunned into silence. The shock overwhelmed him because it felt as though the old problems were still chasing both of them. When the connection between them was cut off, Hinohara remained frozen in disbelief, unable to fully grasp how similar the two worlds were, or how the same kinds of conflict kept repeating in each of them. After that, while returning to Sohan, Hinohara was suddenly seized by Koji in a surprise attack. Then Koji released flames through the power of Homa, even though Homa was not actually with him at that moment. It was clear that he did not have full control over that power, as though it were erupting from him at random due to rage or mental turmoil. When the flames came at him, Hinohara swiftly drew Tsukuyo and used it to block the attack and protect himself. Koji finally revealed his plan. He said that he wanted to take Tsukuyo from Hinohara and use that power to defeat Aki and reclaim Homa once more, because control over power was what would decide the outcome of the conflict. And in the middle of the fight, he actually succeeded in taking Tsukuyo in a sudden moment. Even then, he still intended to attack Hinohara again, but suddenly, Kotoha arrived. In the next instant, the flames surrounded her, and her life was placed in immediate danger. What happened was enough to drag Koji back into old and painful memories of what had happened in the past with Imu, as though that scene were forcing the past to replay before his eyes once again. Soon after that, Kawanote also arrived, while Hinohara rushed toward Kotoha to protect her from the flames. Koji could no longer ignore what he was seeing before him. In the end, he chose to save them, instead of leaving them to die. At that moment, the pain in his arm returned once more, and the memories of the past came flooding back, especially his memories with Aki and Imu before the division had torn them apart. In the past, a rebellion broke out among their followers, and Aki was forced to leave them in order to save Koji and Imu from destruction. After that, they lived for a time in Koguchi village under Oika's care. One day, Koji was struck by a severe fever, so Imu went out to search for medicinal herbs to treat him, even though Oika tried to stop her because it was too dangerous. When Koji woke up, he saw flames burning in the distance and felt that Imu was there. And when he arrived, he found her surrounded by fire after being attacked by Homa. In a cruel moment, the flames consumed her right before his eyes, and he could do nothing to save her. After that, he nearly lost his will to live. He called out to Homa, asking it to come and take him as well. But Homa was impressed by his determination and the strength of his will, and chose him to become its show, as though the sword itself had decided to bind itself to Koji's soul. From that moment on, Koji convinced himself that Homa was Imu herself in some way, or at least the spirit bound to his memories of her. That was why he had become willing to do anything to take it back from Aki and restore the balance he felt he had lost long ago. In the present, Hinohara offered Koji the chance to join them on their journey. He told him that they could change the world together if they chose to stop the conflict instead of fueling it further. But without them realizing it, a Zokusho serving Rinami was watching them from afar, sending news of everything that happened to the various factions. It did not take long for word to reach Aki that the sixth show had truly begun to move. That immediately drove him to take precautions. After that, they went to check on Kiker's condition, even though they were certain she would not live much longer because of her current state and her fading strength. But the greater problem in their eyes was not Kiker. It was Hinohara himself. They had never expected that he would become the Sho of Tsukuyo, that legendary sword which was meant to represent the balance between powers. They already knew that he was on his way to them, but they had also prepared a plan to stop him before he could reach them and overturn the balance of the struggle. Meanwhile, in the other world, Arata could not stop thinking about Hinohara's reaction when he learned that he had struck Kadawaki. He was filled with guilt, and with the fear that the bond between them might already have been broken. He began to wonder whether they had ever truly been real friends at all, or whether what existed between them had been nothing more than a shallow connection created by circumstance. At that moment, Arata saw Suguro standing outside the house, so he quickly went down to him and asked where he could find Kadawaki. Suguro helped him and took him to the place where Kadawaki usually appeared at night with his group. Meanwhile, as Kadawaki was on his way to meet his clique, he overheard them talking about him behind his back, and their words were painfully harsh and unmistakably clear. There, the shocking truth was revealed to him. He realized that they did not see him as a true friend at all, and that they only stayed around him because he was the son of an important politician, and because his presence gave them greater social influence. And when they saw him standing there, listening to everything they had said, they did not even try to deny it. It was as if the truth had already become obvious, and there was no longer any need for pretense. Kadawaki was on the verge of starting a fight with them, but Arata arrived at that very moment and decided to help him and stand up for him. His mere presence there was enough to make that group back away, instead of letting the problem continue. But Kadawaki only grew more irritated with Arata himself. He felt that Arata was treating him as though he were weaker than him, or beneath him, as though he were looking down on him from above. It reminded him of the past, back in middle school, when Arata used to defend Hinohara constantly, as though Hinohara were someone different from him, someone who always needed protection. Arata was just about to tell him that he was not Hinohara, but an entirely different person. But at that moment, Hinohara's mother arrived. The moment she came close, she slapped him because she had been searching for him all day, deeply worried about him and afraid that he might get caught up in more trouble. Arata tried to calm her and reassure her that he was fine, while Kadawaki chose to leave and walk away without opening any new argument. On the other side, while they were walking along the road, heavy rain suddenly began to pour, as if nature itself had changed its mood. Koji immediately realized that they had entered the territory of Yanami, one of the 12 Shino, the show of the Hayami of water. That meant they had entered a dangerous sphere of influence. Because of that, they decided to search for a place to shelter from the rain, and Hinohara used the opportunity to ask Koji more about the 12 Shino. So Koji told him that the 12 Shino rarely gathered together, and that such meetings only happened during rituals or special ceremonies related to rule and the political balance of Amawakuni, especially the 6 Sho. It was not only their powers that were different, but Koji himself had never even seen their faces before. Meanwhile, the 6 Sho were inside Kondo Forest, quietly and carefully carrying out their plan, as though every step had been calculated with precision. They had decided to send Hinohara to the other world so they could replace him with someone they would assign a single mission, to eliminate Hinohara and Tsukuyo completely. In their eyes, the two of them together represented a threat to their plans. At that same time, Katawaki was at the subway station, filled with anger and suffocating frustration because of everything that had happened to him in his life lately. He felt that everyone around him was manipulating him, and that he was nothing more than a tool in a conflict far greater than himself. Little by little, he began placing all the blame on Hinohara for everything that had happened to him, for the old humiliations, and for the psychological pressure he had endured. In the end, he reached the point where he wanted to get rid of him completely, if only to quiet the darkness festering inside him. At that very moment, Hinohara's ritual began. He was the one chosen to exchange places with Katawaki between the two worlds, and before the exchange was completed, Harunawa used his Hayami and planted within Katawaki's mind the memories of what had happened to Hinohara in Amawakuni, so that he would see the truth with his own eyes, feel the same pain, and experience the reality Hinohara had lived through there. When Katawaki arrived in the world of Kondo Forest, he smiled quietly for the first time, as though he was finally about to face the real Hinohara, whom he had always believed to be someone different from the one he knew. Then the 6 Sho took him with them and told him that Hinohara intended to become king, and that he posed a danger to their plans. After that, they offered to make Katawaki a Sho as well, so that he himself would be the one to eliminate Hinohara with his own hands. But in order for Katawaki to defeat Tsukuyo, he needed a Hayami powerful enough to stand against it. That Hayami was called Orochi, and like Tsukuyo, it was a legendary Hayami that had long remained dormant. The moment Katawaki touched it, the rest of the Shino felt the immense surge of energy released from it, as though an ancient power had awakened from a deep slumber. At that same instant, Tsukuyo reacted as well, as though a hidden resonance had been born between the two blades. Within moments, Katawaki became the new Sho of Orochi, as though his fate had completely changed in a single instant. On the following morning, he immediately began searching for Hinohara without hesitation, as though he wanted to settle the conflict burning inside him with his own hands. At the same time, Tsukuyo reacted once again, so Hinohara instinctively drew his sword, as though he had sensed danger before even seeing it. But the shocking truth was that Katawaki had actually reached their world and now stood suddenly before Hinohara. Hinohara could hardly believe that his old friend was standing before him in that strange world, as though time and fate had brought them together once more. Then Katawaki drew Orochi and attacked without the slightest hesitation, as though all the anger of the past had returned to consume him. Hinohara immediately unsheathed Tsukuyo to block the blow, and at last the true confrontation between them began. After that, Katawaki hurled cruel and cutting words at Hinohara, words soaked in hatred and in the jealousy that had built up inside him since the past. His words pierced deep into wounds that had never truly healed, and little by little, the darkness inside Hinohara began to grow, until it nearly transformed into a dark power beyond his control. Hinohara charged forward with force, and Katawaki managed to block the strike, but he was still wounded across the head. At that moment, the darkness began to take greater control over Hinohara. Seeing that, Kotoha rushed toward him and tried to calm him down, trying to stop him from completely falling into the darkness growing inside him. With difficulty, he managed to hear her words, and little by little, he calmed down. Meanwhile, the 6 Sho decided to pull Katawaki out of the battle for the time being, because they still needed to complete Orochi's full awakening before taking the next step. At that very moment, Hinohara suddenly let Tsukuyo fall from his hand. Koji seized it at once and quickly left the area. Then Kaonate rushed after him, determined to retrieve Tsukuyo before it was lost. After that, once Hinohara recovered from the effects of the battle, he woke Kotoha, and the two of them hid together inside a small hut while waiting for Kaonate to return. Kotoha tried to hold his hand to reassure him, but he quietly pulled himself away from her. In that moment, she realized more clearly than ever that he was not the Arata she had known in the past. So Hinohara explained it to her once again. He told her that he had come from another world, and that he and Arata had exchanged places without having any choice in the beginning. He also told her that Arata was now living in his house in the other world, and that he was safe. Then he told her about his past with Katawaki, and how Katawaki and his friends had bullied him ever since middle school. He explained that he had always tried to avoid trouble, and that he never fought back or resisted because he did not want the violence to grow even worse. Elsewhere, when Katawaki regained consciousness, he found a girl sitting beside him. She introduced herself as Miyabi and said that she would be his personal attendant on this journey, and that she would remain by his side in case he needed anything. Then she comforted him about what had happened. In return, he admitted to her that he had actually felt glad that Hinohara had finally faced him instead of continuing to run from the problems of the past. To him, that confrontation had been something necessary, because it meant that each of them would finally have to face his own past with his own hands. After hours of searching through the area, Kaon Ate finally managed to find Koji. She was just about to attack him and try to take Tsukuyo back by force, but he suddenly said that he would return it to Hinohara without a fight. And when they returned to Hinohara, Koji personally handed Tsukuyo back to him in silence. Then he said that, through Tsukuyo, he had felt the weight of the responsibility that Hinohara carried, and he understood that Hinohara was the only one capable of embracing that power and using it without bringing destruction upon the world. The following day, Kaon Ate decided to begin training Hinohara in combat and teach him the basics of controlling both his power and his movements during battle. A little later, Koji took over the training himself in order to deepen Hinohara's experience in close combat. There, he told him that Katawaki had officially become one of the 6 Sho. The moment he heard that, Hinohara immediately understood what it meant. It meant that Katawaki had taken the place of the original member, and that the conflict had now become a direct one between him and his old friend. At the same time, Katawaki was still speaking Hinohara's name with anger in front of Miyabi, as though the past still ruled his thoughts and he could not forget him. Noticing how consumed he was by that obsession, Miyabi said with a faint smile that what he felt might be deeper than simple hatred. She suggested that perhaps he held a kind of admiration for him, because if he truly hated him, he would have left the matter behind and moved on, instead of thinking about him all the time and continuing to live inside his memories of him. Enraged by her words, Katawaki pointed Orochi at Miyabi to force her into silence. He told her that she knew nothing about the past that bound him to Hinohara, and that she could not understand the pain he had lived through. Then he explained that, to him, Hinohara was the reason for all his misery, because he had always felt weaker than him, or somehow beneath him, and he had never been able to accept the truth, that in the past, Hinohara had deliberately chosen to lose to him instead of fighting seriously. From that moment on, he had erased the word friend completely from the way he saw him. Elsewhere, Yanami punished one of the Zokusho who served under him because he had failed to carry out an order he had been given. Yanami accepted no mistakes. To him, an error was a crime in itself. Meanwhile, while Hinohara and his companions continued on their way, he decided not to confront Urami directly at that time. He wanted to understand his character more first, and so he decided that the best step would be to meet the Zokusho serving under him before any major confrontation. For that reason, they headed towards Suzukura City, the largest commercial city in Amawokuni, known for its flourishing trade and constant movement. According to what Koji knew, the one who managed the city was the Zokusho serving under Rin Nami, and his name was Hiko. He was known for his strict administration and his enormous economic influence. There, a new phase was about to begin. Before entering Suzukura, they were forced to pay a passage tax in order to be allowed in, and they would have to pay again when leaving the city. Since the money they carried was not enough to cover those expenses, they had no choice but to work inside the city until they could repay the required amount. That was when a man named Hiro appeared before them. He was the one who brought them into the city and provided them with work. At the same time, Koji hid the mark on his forehead so that no one would realize he was one of the 12 Shino. While they were working, Hinohara noticed that Hiro held significant influence within the city. That made him think that if he got closer to him, he might eventually be able to reach the true Zokusho. But what caught his attention most was a small child who was being forced to work against his will. Later that night, Hinohara began asking the merchants about Yanami's character, hoping to learn something that might help him. him, and when he saw Japanese goods, Hiro arrived, and a conversation began between them. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Hinohara asked Hiro about Yanami. Hiro did not try to avoid the question. Instead, he told him everything he knew, including how Yanami had developed Suzukura and turned it into the strongest commercial city. The following day, the cook in charge struck the child who had been working with them. When they stepped in, they learned that the boy had been accused of damaging the work cart. The boy denied it fiercely, while Hinohara felt that 2 other people were the real ones responsible. Even so, the manager decided to dismiss the child, and not only that, but also to deny him his wages. At that moment, a new situation arose that tested Hinohara's sense of justice once again. The manager declared that the boy's wages would be taken to pay for repairing the broken cart. At once, Keonate's anger flared and she attacked him, but Hiro suddenly arrived and stopped the fight, saying that combat was forbidden inside the city. After that, they accompanied the boy, whose name was Ruka, to the place where he lived. There, they discovered a shocking truth. Behind the ideal image of Suzukura, there were crowded slums packed with people. They also learned that Ruka had no family and lived completely alone. When they heard his story, Hinohara came to understand the true face of the city. Kaon-ate suggested that Ruka should run away, but the passage tax prevented him from leaving. At the same time, Koji noticed that Hiro had been listening in on them, so he went out to speak with him. There, it became clear that Hiro knew Koji, and he asked him what he thought of Hinohara. Koji also knew that Hiro was not his real name, so he answered calmly and said that Hinohara was no ordinary person. After that, Hiro continued listening to their conversation from afar, and when he heard Hinohara speaking about freedom and justice, he was deeply moved. Hinohara's words also made Ruka decide that he truly wanted to leave the city. Because of that, they promised him that they would help him escape that very night. Elsewhere, the Six-Sho decided to take Kadawaki to meet Aki because Aki had gone through an experience similar to the bond between Kadawaki and Hinohara. But the moment they entered Aki's territory, their war airship was immediately attacked. Kadawaki quickly descended and tried to offer Aki an alliance between them. However, Aki refused. What he hated most were people who lacked resolve or a clear will. He said plainly that he hated those who could not fight on their own. And when he turned to leave, Kadawaki tried to beg him not to abandon him. Aki already understood that Kadawaki would never be able to defeat Hinohara as long as he remained trapped in the illusion of anger and hatred. So, in order to free him from that illusion, he attacked one of his eyes. He was about to leave after that, but Kadawaki stopped him once again. And in that moment, Aki saw genuine resolve in his eyes. Only then did he decide to give him one of his own eyes, as a means of testing Kadawaki, and seeing with his own eyes how he would fight Hinohara. Hinohara and his companions began putting together a plan to smuggle Ruka out of Suzukura, but the moment they passed through the gate, Hiro stopped them. That was when the truth was revealed. Hiro himself was the Zokusho they had been searching for. At that point, Hinohara decided to face him because he could no longer accept the injustice that the city was forcing upon ordinary people. When Hiro attacked, enormous amounts of coins burst forth from his hayami, as though money itself had become a weapon. Then he told Hinohara that he might be the person he had been waiting for all this time. He admitted that he had been watching him for a while and knew everything he had gone through. Even that moment when he had nearly been swallowed by darkness. And when he saw his butterfly, he made his decision. Then he told Ruka that he no longer needed to run away, because he himself would take responsibility for changing the city. He declared that he would disobey Yanami's orders, and then made only one request of Hinohara, to bring back the Yanami he had once known in the past. After that, they immediately headed to meet Urami. There, memories from Urami's childhood appeared. One day, when he was still a small child, he made a bracelet with his own hands in order to make his mother happy. But instead of being pleased, she shouted at him and told him that he should have been training in martial arts instead of wasting his time making a bracelet. From that moment onward, the wounds that would shape the Urami of the present began to form inside him. Since that day, he had decided that he would do anything until the day came when his mother would finally be proud of him, and he came to believe that his only path toward that was to become king. To him, that title was not merely power, it was true recognition of his worth. Meanwhile, while Hinohara and his companions were waiting for Kadi, who had been watching the area, an attacker suddenly appeared and abducted Kotoha. Hinohara tried to save her, but the attacker was faster. He took her and vanished, and it was clear that what had happened had been arranged by Yunomi. Without a moment of hesitation, Hinohara headed straight for that place. When he entered, he saw Kotoha bound and trapped inside a transparent spherical container, which was slowly filling with water. He tried to use Tsukuyo to save her, but its power failed to free her. Then Yunomi appeared and said coldly, if he wanted to save her, he would have to defeat him, or submit to him. Immediately after that, he used his Hayami and launched his attack at once. He gave Hinohara's companions no chance to interfere or rescue Kotoha, and Yunomi's Zokusho were there as well, watching the battle unfold. At that moment, Hiro said to them that if Hinohara won, then perhaps they might once again see the Yunomi they had once known. But Yunomi continued his assault without pause, and his power was overwhelming. Then, in a critical moment, Hiro warned Hinohara of a surprise attack, and that only made Yunomi's anger burn even hotter. Then, Yunomi rushed straight at Hiro. After that, he used his terrifying technique against Hinohara, the technique of reversing time. In an instant, time itself began to turn backward. Wounds vanished, attacks disappeared, and every attempt at resistance was erased as though it had never happened at all. At that exact moment, Katawaki arrived. He descended from the ship at once, fully prepared to enter the battle. The confrontation was no longer just an attempt to save Kotoha. It had become a battle to decide Yunomi's very fate. Katawaki moved to attack Hinohara again, but the moment he saw his condition, he immediately understood that the situation was far worse than he had expected. He tried to pull him away, but Yunomi stopped him, attacked him as well, and then dragged him into the water, saying that the two of them would drown together. And there, Yunomi's true plan began. Inside an illusory world, Hinohara saw himself as a child, standing before his mother. She asked him about submission. He was caught off guard by the question, but he did not utter that word. At that, Yunomi reversed time even further and made Hinohara younger. This time, his mother begged him to say it, to admit his submission, but Hinohara remained silent. Yunomi was stunned. He could not believe that Hinohara was capable of opposing his own mother. His anger flared and he turned him into an infant, trying to erase his will completely. But suddenly, Hinohara heard a woman's voice calling out to him. It was Kotoha's voice. Because of that voice, he regained his awareness and used the power of Tsukuyo once more. And he did not stop at breaking the technique of reversed time. He also succeeded in saving Kotoha. Yunomi tried to attack again, but this time, his own Hayami betrayed him. And in that moment, he understood the truth. He had lost. Then he rushed desperately toward his mother, but she disappeared. She had been nothing more than a puppet created through the power of his Hayami. Only then did he finally speak. He confessed that everything he had done, all of his ambition, all of his efforts to become one of the 12 Shino, had been for one reason alone, to make his mother smile. But even after becoming one of the 12, he had never received that look from her, nor that acknowledgement. And so, the true reason behind his cruelty was finally laid bare. He had never been seeking power. He had been seeking love. A love he had never once received. After that, Yunomi's mother's view of him changed, but she died before he could fully understand the truth. And when Koji noticed the keepsake his mother had left behind, he approached it. It became clear that Yunomi had never opened that box since the day his mother gave it to him. But when he finally opened it, he froze where he stood, because inside it, he found the bracelet he had made for her with his own hands when he was a child. Then one of the Zokusho who served under him stepped forward and told him the truth. Ever since his father's death, his mother had forced herself to raise him with harshness. She had deliberately spoken cruel words to him only to give him the drive to become strong. She had been afraid of the day when she too would be gone, and leave him all alone. That was why she had wanted him to grow strong enough to live without her. At that, Yunomi broke down in tears and apologized to Hiro and to the Zokusho who served under him. But suddenly, Katawaki arrived and issued his challenge to Hinohara, demanding a fight. Within moments, everyone was shocked when Katawaki's Hayami evolved, and the instant Hinohara drew Tsukuyo, Katawaki rushed at him at once. Although Hinohara managed to block the strike, the collision between them created a massive explosion from the sheer force of their power. Hinohara used that moment to try to escape outside, but Katawaki continued chasing him and rained attacks down on him without pause. After that, the two of them moved out into the open courtyard. There, Kati noticed that Hinohara was hesitating, as though he did not truly want to fight Katawaki seriously. So she told him that if he refused to answer him properly, he would never be able to reach the Himeo. Those words were enough to ignite his resolve once again. But the problem was obvious. Tsukuyo lacked sufficient offensive power. Because of that, Hinohara was struggling to break through the pressure of Katawaki's relentless attacks. Kati noticed that as well. At that moment, Yunomi looked once more at the bracelet, then declared before his Zokusho that he would submit to Hinohara. He knew that this decision meant he would never become king, but he had realized something more important, that even if he gave up that title, his mother in truth would still have been proud of him. Hinohara tried to stop him, but Yunomi's decision was absolute, and the instant that submission was completed, Tsukuyo's power erupted with overwhelming force, and the entire place trembled under the weight of that terrifying surge. Far away, Aki felt that energy. At that moment, the battle ceased to be merely a conflict between individuals. It became the beginning of a true change in the balance of power itself. The explosion shook the ground violently, and the whole area nearly collapsed. Even Kiryuki could not hold back his tears before the sheer magnitude of the energy being released. When the dust finally cleared, Hinohara and Katawaki were still standing. Immediately, Katawaki charged once more. But this time, Hinohara used Tsukuyo's power differently, and through it, he succeeded in deflecting every single one of Katawaki's attacks without exception. In that moment, Katawaki remembered Aki's words, and only now did he understand what they meant. He realized that the eye Aki had given him had not been mere power, it had been a test. Aki had wanted Katawaki to see, through that very eye, how he himself fought. Even Koji was taken aback when he heard that admission, and when Katawaki attacked once more, Hinohara used Tsukuyo to block the blow, and succeeded in knocking him to the ground. Then Tsukuyo shone with a light greater than ever before. Suddenly, the earth began to tremble, and enormous rocks rose up from deep beneath the ground. And in that moment, Hinohara unveiled a new technique of Tsukuyo. When Hinohara unleashed that technique against Katawaki, the latter tried to withstand it with every ounce of power he had. But he quickly realized the truth. He would not be able to endure that force for long. So he gave Hinohara one final warning and told him that the outcome would be different the next time they met. Then, through the power of Sosen, Katawaki was hurled far away, and before he could crash down, one of the Sixsho caught him and saved him. As Hinohara stood there, feeling the full weight of what had just happened, he understood that this battle had not been a mere victory. It had been a clear declaration that the balance of power had truly begun to change. Meanwhile, as Hinohara was still sensing the new power of Tsukuyo, every memory he had of Katawaki returned to his mind. From their school days, all the way to the moment they had become enemies in another world. A few minutes later, the Zokusho who served under Yunomi approached him and made their decision. They too would submit to Hinohara, and it was not because of power alone. They wanted to remain by Urami's side, so they could protect him and guide him along the new path he had chosen. Hinohara could not refuse their wish, and in a single moment, they all submitted to him. After that, when he spoke with Arata once again, he told him that Katawaki had exchanged places with one of the Sixsho. Then he warned him and asked him to be extremely careful. Elsewhere, the Sixsho could hardly believe that Noah had become capable of reaching them and tracking their movements. Because of that, they decided that eliminating Hinohara had now become an urgent priority that could no longer be delayed. As for the remaining members of the Shino, they were eager to confront him with their own hands. And here the story comes to an end, my dear viewers. We hope you enjoyed it and had a great time following it. Before you close the video, do not forget to leave a like to support us, subscribe for more, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any new anime stories. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.